I want to start by saying I'm not someone who gets rattled easily. I worked nights for almost 4 years at a long-term care facility in Western Ohio, a big brick building that used to be a county hospital back in the 70s before they converted it, and nothing much bothered me. You see enough in that job late enough at night that your brain kind of recalibrates what normal looks like. I'd heard every story from every nurse about this room or that wing, and I never bought into any of it. I was a floor tech. My job was vital signs, repositioning residents, keeping call lights answered. It was hard, unglamorous work, and I liked it. I liked the quiet. I liked that most of the building was asleep and it was just me and whoever else was on shift, a few nurses, maybe a CNA on another wing. The sixth floor was our memory care unit. Locked ward, keypad entry. Most of our residents up there were in advanced stages of dementia. And working nights up there had its own particular rhythm. You'd hear someone calling out, sometimes singing, sometimes asking for people who weren't there anymore. You got used to that. It wasn't scary, it was just sad. And you learned to be gentle and patient and move on. My regular partner on the sixth floor was a woman named Rhonda. She'd worked there for 11 years, knew every resident by name and habit, and was one of those people who could tell when someone was going to have a bad night just by the way they looked at dinner. We worked well together, Tuesday through Saturday, midnight to 8. It was a good schedule, honestly. I'd sleep days and my wife worked days, and we barely crossed paths during the week, which sounds bad, but it's just how shift life works. You make it work. The night this started was a Thursday in January, maybe 2 a.m., deep into a week where we'd had 2 residents pass within 3 days of each other. That's not unusual in long-term care, but it puts a weight on the floor that you can feel. Staff get quieter. Rhonda had gone down to the supply room on 4 to grab some things, and I was doing a round through the east hallway, the longer one, which ends in a sunroom that we kept dark at night. The hall is maybe 60 feet long, fluorescent lights on a dimmer after midnight, so they're about halfway up. Residents' doors are mostly closed. It was quiet, quieter than usual, but I put that down to the week we'd been having. I was almost to the end of the hall when I heard a door close. Not slam, just close, firmly, like someone had pulled it shut behind them. I looked back and every door I could see was the same as it had been. I stood there for a second, listening. Nothing. I told myself it was probably the HVAC, old buildings do all kinds of things, and finished my round. When I got back to the nurse's station, I mentioned it to Marcus, one of the charge nurses that night. He shrugged and said the building was old, and he was probably right. I didn't think about it again. The next Thursday, same shift, same time, almost to the minute, I was doing the same round and I heard it again. A door closing. Same hallway, same end, near the sunroom. This time I stopped walking and just waited. The light at the far end of the hall, the one above the sunroom entrance, flickered once, twice, then steadied. I'm being honest when I say I felt something shift in me right then. Not panic. Not panic, just a heightened awareness, like a switch getting flipped. I walked the whole hall, checked every door. All the residents I could safely check on were in their beds. Nothing was out of place. I told Rhonda about it when she came back. She got very quiet and then asked me which light had flickered. I pointed down the hall. She said, "That's 614's old room." I asked what she meant by old room. She told me that the resident who'd passed that week, the first of the 2, had been in room 614 for 6 years. She said he used to close his door himself every night when he was more mobile, and the staff had just gotten used to leaving it for him. She said she wasn't trying to make it weird. She just thought I should know. I'm not a superstitious person. I'm really not. But I'll admit I stood there and didn't say anything for a second because I genuinely didn't know what to say. 2 weeks went by without anything. I'd been doing rounds in that hallway, same as always, and everything was fine, normal. I was starting to think the door sounds were just the building and the flickering light was a faulty ballast, which was probably true. Then on a Tuesday, first week of February, around 3:45 a.m., I was in the sunroom at the end of the hall. I was in there because one of our residents, a woman named Dorothy, had wandered in, and I was sitting with her, helping her calm down. She was facing the window, and I was facing the door back into the hall, and Dorothy went very still. I know how animals and people sometimes react to things we can't see or explain, and I've watched enough people with dementia to know that they sometimes respond to things that aren't there. So I wasn't particularly alarmed when Dorothy went still. But then she pointed at the doorway behind me and said clearly, much more clearly than she usually spoke, "He's waiting for Marvy." I turned around. The doorway was empty. The hall was dark and empty and quiet. I asked Dorothy who she was talking about. She'd already moved on, was looking at the window again, mumbling something I couldn't make out. I stayed with her for another 10 minutes until she was calm enough to go back to bed. I looked up the name Marvy later that week. Marvy to people who knew him was the resident who had passed, the one from room 6114. The thing is, Dorothy had never shared a hallway with him. She'd been on the West Wing her entire stay. There was no reason she would have known his name, let alone his nickname. I told Marcus and Rhonda both. Rhonda didn't look surprised. Marcus filed it as an incident note, because that's what you do when a memory care resident says something unexpected and potentially meaningful. The note went into Dorothy's chart. I don't know if anyone ever read it. I still work there. I've been back in that hallway hundreds of times since, and nothing else has happened. The light was replaced, and it doesn't flicker anymore. Room 614 has a new resident now, a man named Gerald, and I'm glad he's doing okay. But I still walk that east hallway a little faster after 3 a.m., and I always look at the doorway of the sunroom when I come back out. I know what I heard. I know what Dorothy said. I don't know what it means, and I think that's the part I've decided to just live with. I've been a stock associate at a big box grocery store for going on 6 years. Overnight shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and I genuinely like it. No customers, good music on the overhead, a solid crew. There are maybe 12 of us on the floor on any given night, plus a manager and a couple of people in the back room. The store is one of those massive ones, the kind where the ceilings are high and your voice echoes in the frozen aisle even when it's full of sound. At 2 a.m., when you're the only one in that section, it's a different feeling. Not scary, just big and cold and quiet. I've worked with a guy named Pete for most of my time there. Pete does Frozen exclusively. That's his department, his baby. And he's one of those people who just knows his job, cob cold. No pun intended. Fastest shelf rotation in the store. He'd shown me the freezer ropes back when I started, and we'd always worked well together. He's a no-nonsense ex-military, show-up early kind of person, not given to drama or exaggeration. So when Pete told me in December that he'd been hearing something in the walk-in freezer, I took it seriously. The walk-in at our store is behind the frozen aisle, accessible through a heavy insulated door. It's big, maybe the size of a 2-car garage, and it runs constantly. The compressors are loud, which makes it hard to hear much once you're inside. Pete said he'd been hearing a sound he couldn't place, something underneath the compressor noise, a kind of slow rhythmic scraping. He'd gone in twice to check and found nothing. He figured it was a bracket coming loose on one of the shelving units. Mentioned it to maintenance. Maintenance came, looked, said everything looked fine. I went in with Pete on a Friday night around 1:30 a.m. to help him rotate some product. And I heard it. It was subtle, but once you heard it, you couldn't not hear it. A low scraping in a rhythm. Slow enough that it didn't sound mechanical. Mechanical sounds have a consistency to them that this didn't quite have. I looked at Pete. He looked at me. He said, yeah. I walked the perimeter of the freezer, checked the shelving brackets, looked at the compressor unit in the back corner. Nothing was visibly loose. The scraping had stopped by the time I finished my loop. We reported it again to the manager on shift, a woman named Deja, who said she'd put in another maintenance request. I went back to my aisle, told myself it was probably ice buildup on the condenser or something. That happens. The following week, Wednesday, around 2:10 a.m., I went into the freezer alone to pull some product that Pete had left a note about. The compressors were running. Cold hit me the second I opened the door. I had my coat on, and I went to the back shelves to pull what I needed. I was crouched down reading shelf tags when I heard the scraping, and this time it was close. Close enough that I stood up immediately. I looked left, Looked right. Nothing. I looked up. There was a handprint on the interior wall about 6 feet up, near where the wall meets the ceiling track of the shelving unit. It was large, smeared slightly like someone had steadied themselves while climbing. The frost around it was disturbed in a way that looked recent, the kind of disturbance that the ambient cold would recrystallize over in a few hours. It wasn't old. I went and got Deja immediately, and I want to be clear that I know how this sounds. Spooky handprint in the freezer. But that's not the feeling I had. The feeling I had was that someone had been in there recently, had been up on the shelving unit, and might still be in the building. We checked the freezer together and it was empty. We checked the back room. We checked the store. Deja called the on-call district manager and we pulled the security footage from the freezer door. The footage showed the freezer door opening at 11:53 p.m., almost 2 hours before I went in, and a person entering. The angle was bad, just their back, dark jacket, they were wearing a hat. They were in the freezer for 4 minutes. They left. What the footage didn't show was how they got into the back room, because there's a camera on the back room entry, and it didn't catch anyone coming in that way. There's one other entrance to the back room, a loading dock door, and that camera had been down for maintenance that week. Of course it had. The police came, took a report, and that was essentially it. No one was found. The handprint was photographed. Maintenance finally found a loose ceiling panel at the back of the freezer that led up into the conduit space above the drop ceiling. Not big enough for most people, but possible. The panel was resecured. We never found out who it was or why they were in there. A transient looking for warmth is the most common theory, and I hope that's what it was. But someone who just wants to stay warm doesn't climb up to the ceiling of a walk-in freezer and perch there listening. I think about the scraping sound differently now. The rhythm of it. I think they were shifting their weight, trying to stay balanced and quiet while Pete and I were 10 feet below them. I think about that more than I probably should. I still work nights. I still do freezer pulls when Pete needs help, but I don't do them alone anymore. And I always look up. This is something that happened about 2 years ago when I was working overnight at a toll plaza on a stretch of interstate in rural Tennessee. I want to be upfront that I know toll booths have a reputation for weird stories, and I've heard most of them, and most of them are exaggerated or outright made up. People who work overnights at isolated jobs like that tell stories. It's a way of passing the time. I was never one of those people. I liked the quiet, liked the routine, liked that most nights nothing happened at all except cars and trucks rolling through at regular intervals. The overnight shift ran 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. On weeknights, especially past 2 a.m., you could go 15 or 20 minutes without a single vehicle. Our plaza had 4 lanes, but we only staffed one booth overnight, center lane, and the others were on automated transponder mode. My coworker on those nights was a man named Daryl, who worked the lane next to mine, but we rotated so one person could take breaks. We were the only 2 people there. The nearest town was about 8 miles east. The plaza had an office in the back, a bathroom, bad fluorescent lighting. You know the vibe. This was in October, which matters because of how dark it gets out there. No streetlights on that stretch. When a car rolled through, you'd see headlights coming from maybe a quarter mile out, and that was it until they were right at the window. I like that about it. It had a rhythm. The car that showed up at 3:47 a.m. on a Wednesday didn't have its headlights on. I saw it coming because the plaza lights reflected off the hood when it got close enough. A dark sedan, I couldn't tell you the make, it was just a dark boxy shape, rolling at maybe 10 miles an hour through my lane. No lights. I assumed the driver had fallen asleep, and I leaned out the window to knock on the roof. Standard thing to do. The car stopped, and I looked in through the driver's side window. The man inside was awake. He was looking straight ahead through the windshield. I said, "Sir, your headlights aren't on." He didn't respond. He was maybe 50, plain-looking, salt and pepper hair, wearing a button-up shirt. He looked completely normal, except that he wouldn't look at me and he wasn't moving. I said it again, louder. He turned his head and looked at me, and he said, very quietly, "Is there a rest stop?" I told him there was one about 12 miles east. He nodded slowly. He still hadn't turned his lights on. I processed his toll, and he rolled forward into the dark and was gone. I watched his taillights not appear. He just went into the darkness without turning his lights on. I told Daryl about it on our next overlap. Daryl said that was strange, but not unheard of. Some people drive with their lights off on purpose. Some people forget. He said, unless the guy seemed like an actual danger, there wasn't much we could do. I agreed with him. I put it out of my head. At 5:12 a.m., same night, 90 minutes later, the same car came back through, going the opposite direction, west. I recognized the car because it had a cracked left taillight, which I'd noticed when it passed the first time. And again, no headlights. I leaned out and the same man was driving. He looked at me without me saying anything this time. He said there was no rest stop. I told him there was, he just hadn't gone far enough east. He said, I went east for an hour. I didn't say anything to that because I didn't know what to say. The rest stop was 12 miles out, not an hour. He was either lying or he had gone somewhere else entirely. He paid his toll in cash, exact change, and pulled away west. I called Daryl over and told him. Daryl said, that's not right, meaning the math didn't add up. He looked at the camera monitor and we watched the rear of the car disappear off the west end of the frame. Daryl said to log it, so I did. I wrote down the time, the cracked taillight, the fact that the car had no plates. I hadn't noticed it when the car was at my window, but when we pulled the camera footage, we had a camera on each lane. I could see clearly in the frame from the first pass that there were no license plates on the car, front or rear. The second pass confirmed it. A car with no plates, no headlights at 3:47 a.m. and then again at 5:12 on a rural interstate stretch with the nearest town 8 miles away. The highway patrol came out that morning when our shift supervisor called it in. They ran the footage and took a report. They said they'd look into it. I never heard back. I looked online over the following weeks for any reports of a disturbance or accident on that stretch or anyone found, and I didn't find anything. What I think about still honestly is the part where he said there was no rest stop, because either he never went east or he did go east and came back and is lying about the rest stop, or something else happened in that 90 minutes on that dark stretch of road that I don't have an explanation for. 12 miles at highway speed is 15 minutes. He had 90. I don't know where he went. I don't know where he came from.